So I need a plaster wedging table for the ceramic studio. And this is a photo of what we're going to be doing. The point of this is when you're working with clay and there's too much moisture in the clay, it starts to get really wet. You need to dry it out. So you put the wet clay on top of the plaster, and it absorbs it, brings it back to regular clay. And this is kind of how we're getting there. We need to build a form. So we have some lumber, pre-cut plywood. It came, I think, 24 by 24, all ready to go at the hardware store. Some smaller pieces of lumber that I screwed together to kind of make like a mold. I just have 2 screws in each side, and we're going to set that on top, screw it all together from the bottom, and we'll be caulking all of the edges so we can put the plaster inside. And then just use the caulking for all of the edges. This is what we decided to use. I got this at the hardware store. Latex caulking. It says Windows on it, so I mean it should be fine. And we're going to be doing just all of the edging with this. There. Now we are just waiting for it to dry. So I decided to run string on the inside of the mold to give the plaster some strength. I just grabbed what I had on hand, which was like this twine, and I used some hooks that I put all along the inside of the mold, and I just ran the string from side to side, no particular order, just kind of wherever. Wrapped the string around the hook and then went back to a different side and just kind of continued that until I had a good amount of string inside the mold. This is the plaster Paris that we're going to be using. This is a dry mix, kind of like flour. You use 2 parts plaster to 1 part water. You can use either warm water or cold water. I decided to do cold water because it's a big piece that I'm working with, and then cold water will take longer to set. If you only had a small piece, warm water would probably be a little bit easier, but it does set faster, so you want to be careful with that. So what I'm doing is I'm just carefully spreading the plaster into my my bucket, and I'm going to do that over and over and over again until some heaps or some mounds of plaster form, and then I'll start mixing. So I've got the plaster ready to go and my mold is all set up. It's all dry now. Just want to make sure that it's on a level surface so when I pour the plaster in, it's not going to be wonky or offset. You're going to have to pour the plaster in 2 separate stages because the mold is so big. This is the first pour, and this is the time to look for any imperfections. You can see here I had a leak, so I took care of that quick. The plaster pretty much seals itself. Mixing some more plaster, and this is kind of the consistency that you want. It might be a little thin. I'll probably add a little bit more before I pour it in, but this is kind of what we're looking for here. I mix with my hand to get all the clumps. I like to feel it. Just kind of touching it carefully to see how set up it is. See if it's okay to pour in the rest of the plaster. It should be fine. So this is what it looks like after the first section. And I just poured the second section in. You can see that it's set up pretty quick. There's a few little puddles on the surface. But it did set up really quick. But it's nice and flat. It's not a lot of imperfections. Do have a little bit of plaster left over, and I did use a ruler to go over the top. Kind of slid it across, back and forth. But mostly I just wiggled it, gave it a good vibration, and that's really what settled the top and kind of gave it a nice gloss. Yeah, so I'm happy with this. This is going to come out nice. This is about a week later, and you can see it's creamier almost, more chalky looking. It's still pretty cool to the touch. We live in Maine, so it's not dry yet at all. So maybe another week. When I did this project, it was kind of in between seasons. We live in Maine, and it wasn't quite time to have the furnace on. It's still kind of cold in the basement. It took forever for this piece to dry. And that's when everything went downhill. So this was a complete fail. I'm sure it could have worked, but it didn't. And we're gonna try again, make some changes. Let me show you how it went wrong. So when I made this project, I made a wood mold and poured the plaster in. Because it took so long for it to dry, it did sit there for quite some time, weeks it sat there. And you can see that I have it sitting on a tabletop. Well, there's a gap underneath that completely molded. This is bad. In my past job, I worked for a mold remediation company, and this is probably the worst mold I've ever seen. So we definitely had to get this out. The whole project was completely ruined. I took the wood off to see if it had absorbed into the plaster, and of course it did. So make sure that you wear good protection. Definitely have to have a respirator if you're going to be dealing with any type of mold. Clearly this project was a fail, big fail. But we're going to be doing it again, making some changes, and I will post another video. So here's what not to do.